I have with me now Dr. Partha Chatterjee, Professor of Economics at Shivnada University, Dr. Ranjit Mehta, CEO and Secretary General of PhD CCI, and Mr. Navneet Goyal, former Principal Chief Commissioner of Custom and CGST, with us on the broadcast as well. Let me begin this conversation with Dr. Partha Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, I'm being told Dr. Ajay Dua, former Commerce Secretary, also with us on the broadcast. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us on NewsX. Dr. Partha Chatterjee, I must begin by asking you, sir, I'm not sure if you were there when we were just having a conversation with MOS education, but your big takeaways, sir, for the education sector, and how do you expect particularly higher education in India to be impacted by the budget?
Well, thank you for having me here. And so I think thinking from the perspective of the education sector, right, there were a few things that were there in the budget, mostly related to very specific sectoral needs, right? And I think one thing that we have to realize that India has a large base of young population that we need to educate. And we have a very small window, maybe about 25 years now, when the demographic transition will be completed. So we have to do things within that window. And while we have been doing a lot in terms of setting up new universities, new private universities, new international universities, setting up campuses here, I think we need to do a lot more. And therefore, one area where the government has focused a lot more is to create skill sets needed for specific industries, whether it's the pharma or the tourism or other sectors. So that is a welcome thing. Also, as the minister mentioned, that setting up hostels for the girls in each district, that's absolutely a great move, because in India we really need to harness the power of women. The participation of women in workforce remains low. It's increasing over time a little bit, but it remains low. And if we can bring them to higher education sector and eventually to the workforce, that will increase India's economic output by a lot. So I think there are certain things by which we can expect the education sector to benefit. There was also a mention of setting up education cities, which will have different universities, different training centers, and so on. So I think that's also something that's going to be very, very helpful for the education sector. Yeah.
And Dr. Partha Chatterjee, I also have to understand from you as an academic leader, of course, do you see that the 500 crores, I believe, that has been allocated to the AI Center for Excellence will act as a genuine research catalyst? And is there anything else that has stood out for you in the budget as far as AI education is concerned? Because I know that the integration of AI into the education sector is something that educationists such as yourself, academics such as yourself, are really now dealing with. This conversation on a daily basis, that what is the right balance to strike as far as giving people access to AI and educating the youth in AI use is concerned, versus, of course, continuing their education in a more traditional manner as well. So anything that stood out to you in that matter, sir?
Yeah, look, I mean, today we live at a time when things are changing, every day. Right now, for example, everyone is talking about AI agents creating a website for themselves, right? I mean, that's where we are right now. So we absolutely have to educate our students, expose our students to that reality, right? So we have to do that, and therefore any allocation towards that is definitely welcome. But more than that, I think, we need not only allocation, but also people. And that's where I think we need to focus on, that how can we get people not only within India, but also from outside India to relocate maybe and to come back. And that's something that we have to work on today, as you also mentioned at the top of the show, that we live in a time when the geopolitical situation is such, the global uncertainty is very high. And as an economist, I'm very concerned about that. But that also gives us an opportunity to kind of attract talent. And I think where I would have wanted a little more to see in the budget is on that front. That last budget, there were some announcements on that front. And if we could have focused on that, that how could we attract talent which is now much more vulnerable to all these visa issues and all things that's going on across the world, right? Having said that, there's another thing that I think will kind of have a ripple effect on the education sector, which is the announcement of the semiconductor mission 2, right? And the investments around that. Because again, it's one thing is to just say that we need manufacturing, but how do we get manufacturing? Capital is probably among the easier things to get, but we need that talent, we need that manpower, we need that kind of a workforce at all levels, right, from the scientists to the people who will create these factories and so on. So I think there's a large opportunity in the education sector to tie in to these kind of missions, particularly the semiconductor mission that I think a lot of money has been allocated to that. And we can definitely work together with the semiconductor firms which are setting up plants here or setting up their R&D centers here, as well as the government and the universities can definitely come up with a collaborative in a collaborative effort to create that kind of a workforce that's needed to make these missions successful.
Absolutely. And so before I bring in some of our other guests into the conversation as well, I want to understand your perspective or your expectations rather from some of the recent FTAs that have been signed. And a lot has also been discussed as far as higher education is concerned or an exchange of students is concerned. What is your big expectation and how does that tie into some of the budget announcements?
Right. The FTAs, from an economics perspective, I think those are, again, something that are very important for India because we live in a time which is, very, very uncertain. The uncertainty index is very high. And in fact, one of the things about the budget is how does it address that uncertainty, right? And for the education sector and particularly for individuals, this uncertainty has created many challenges, right? India has been one of the source countries for people moving into different countries. And partly that has helped us also, right? I mean, we talk about the brain drain, but the fact is that there is also a lot of exchange in terms of ideas, if not in terms of capital also, but in terms of ideas and things like that happen when we have a world that is mobile and where talent can move globally, right? So if the FTAs continue to allow that people can move to different countries and different universities and workplaces, that one, it reduces the misallocation of workforce globally and therefore the whole world benefits. But also India in specific can benefit by getting these people back to India or even otherwise through collaborative efforts and things like that. So I think the FTAs definitely help India even in the education sector. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in NewsX with that perspective. Let me also bring in Dr. Ranjit Mehta, CEO and Secretary General of PHDCCI. Dr. Mehta, I have to understand from you your biggest takeaway of Budget 2026, sir.
Well, thank you very much. In fact, today's budget, if you look at it, I mean, this is the budget which strikes the right balance between the growth and stability. We have seen that in the last couple of months, government has already taken such steps like GST 2.0, and also last year there was a big boon for our taxpayers, indirect taxes. However, in this budget, it is a clear message from the government that they are focused on growth. The growth has been the center pillar of this budget. It is with the big push in infrastructure and for private capital investment, and also there has been fiscal prudence, which has been the top agenda of the government. So overall, if you just look at it, the best part of this budget has been that there has been it's very encouraging that there has been a very good step like having the MSME growth fund for small and medium businesses, as we have signed many FTAs with various countries. On the backdrop of US tariffs and how the disruption has been created in global economy through geopolitical challenges and tariff war and all those things, I think that we cannot depend on one economy. So Indian government has definitely taken the right steps. We have done FTAs like advanced economy like UK, then of course Oman, New Zealand, and the biggest FTA with EU, which is a
Yes.
very recent thing which has happened. So when we are doing these FTA, it is very important that our MSMEs, they need to be prepared for the global economy. They need to have that competitive advantage. They need to have that competitive edge. And to do that, we have to create an ecosystem in our country. And how that can be created is, of course, by supporting the MSMEs. So one challenge for MSMEs is definitely the availability of the easy access to finance. And secondly, I think access to technology. Because today, if you really want to scale it up, and it is not possible without focusing on the technology. So I think this MSME or SME growth fund is a enabler, and this is a right step at the right time. And at the same time, the strong, allocation to defense and, that shows that government has priority in security also. Then if you just look at the infrastructure, 12.2 lakh crore of outlay for the infrastructure is definitely because this is going to create jobs in our country. And, government capex is very, very important at the same time. And the focus on other cities, not only in big cities, tier 2, tier 3 cities, have been the focus of government in this budget. So the overall, if you just look at it, the kind of stability, the kind of inclusive growth the government is focusing on is
Okay.
commendable. And those days are gone when the budget was specific to certain products which are getting cheaper or getting expensive. So it is away from that. This budget is a long-term vision which is aligned with Viksit Bharat 2047. I think every step that we are taking today is that it goes towards Viksit Bharat. And to do that, I think stability in policy and structural reforms and also momentum in execution is very, very important. At
Okay.
the end of it is the ease of doing business and also the cost of doing business. If we
Okay.
just look at the
But,
kind of
but Dr. Mehta, I
infrastructure.
must ask you a question on that. When you've just spoken about ease of doing business and cost of doing business, so do you feel that the 2026 budget has done enough to actually lower the cost of doing business, or is there still a lot of regulatory burden which could be the biggest bottleneck, which is something that we've been discussing for many years, right? When it comes to about we are moving up the ranks as far as ease of doing business is concerned. But when I do have conversations with some of the entrepreneurs, they do still talk to me about regulatory burdens. But in the 2026 budget, do you feel that it's done enough to actually lower the cost of doing business?
You see, cost of doing business cannot be lowered through a single budget. However, it is
Right.
an attempt in that direction. Number one, if you just talk about cost of doing business or regulatory, burden that is on MSMEs, I think for that they have, given in this 10,000 crore fund that they'll be assisted by ICAI on these regulatory things. And secondly, we have a federal structure. We are the largest democracy in the world, and the land is a big cost in doing business. So that adds up to cost of doing business, and land is a state subject. At the same time, power is also a state subject. However, the government at the center can make the enabling environment and also create certain policies where these things can be addressed. However, the implementation part, the execution part remains with the state government. Here, I think that budget is one part. However, if you really want to reduce the cost of doing business, the contribution and support from the state governments will be very, very essential. Without that, we cannot do. And however, on part of ease of doing business, I think the best thing today about the government is whatever challenges that you have, if you just put it to the government of India, they are definitely going to look at it, and they make every effort. Whatever genuine problem is there, they are certainly ready to look at
Okay.
it, and most of the time they are addressing those problems.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that perspective. I'd like to bring in Mr. Navneet Goyal, former Principal
Thank
Chief
you.
Commissioner of Customs and CGST, into the conversation. Mr. Goyal, thank you so much, sir, for speaking with NewsX. I have to ask from you as well, what's your biggest takeaway from Budget 2026?
Thank you for inviting me to your channel, madam. See, from the customs and GST perspective, I see the FTAs and the Viksit Bharat vision will mean more imports and more exports. This will need speeding up of cargo clearances, and FTAs would mean they would see as imports would grow, the challenge would also grow that people should not divert their goods through these FTA countries. So what government has tried to do in this budget is, one is they try to encourage compliant behavior. They said if you are a trusted entity, then we'll give you benefits. The duty deferment period has been increased. The automatic goods registration and clearance for trusted clients have been voluntary payments up till now. People were not willing to pay because there were some penal charges if you break a law. And even if you're willing to pay customs duties, you were supposed to pay penalties also. Now government has said, okay, no penalty. We take this as a non-punitive charge. This will help in compliant behavior. Next thing that they have done is system-driven clearances and digital governance. What they have tried to do, a system would be laid out where the customs clearance work would be done through system, and the officers' touch points will be reduced. This should increase compliant behavior, and this should reduce delays. That is the major change which government has done. Besides that, there are some other changes also. For example, on the passenger side, a lot of passengers have been complaining that gold prices have, they've earlier a person could import gold worth only 50,000 rupees, and for male, and 1 lakh rupees for female. With the gold prices now touching almost 1.5 lakh for 10 grams. Now this has been liberalized as earlier. Now 40 grams by female and 20 grams by male have been. Similarly, duty-free allowances have been increased from 50,000 rupees to 75,000 rupees. So this was a genuine problem which was being faced. And similarly, some concessions have been given when somebody is transferring residence from abroad. And a uniform duty has been put on personal imports, has been reduced from 20% to 10%. Similarly, certain sectors have been given duty-free benefits. For example, exemption on capital goods for manufacture of lithium-ion cells, or leather and marine sectors have been given benefits. The duty exemption which was available to import specified inputs for leather and synthetic footwear will also be available now for shoe uppers. Similarly, fish which is caught in high seas
Yes.
will be allowed duty-free into Indian shores. And if they're exported out, it will be treated as exports. Similarly, duty-free imports of the specified inputs have been increased from 1% to 3% of FOB for marine sector. Exemption to goods for nuclear power projects has been given. Exemption on parts and components and engines for manufacturing aircrafts have been given. So government has tried to address many things. Specified sectors which are of high priority, they have been given duty-free benefits. Similarly, procedures have been relaxed to encourage compliant behavior and passenger facilitation measures. This is a great budget from that. On GST, we have already seen GST 2.0 in
Yes.
September, October. Yes.
But Mr. Goyal, I'd like to then understand from you, as far as GST is concerned, sir, how soon, or rather, do you think that the GST cuts have started paying dividends, or how soon do you believe that those cuts will pay dividends?
See, GST cuts should be understood in two ways. There were certain goods where 28% was brought down to 18%. These were big goods, like cars, air conditioners, those things. There, the duty cuts have already resulted into price cuts, which all of us have seen, and people have rushed in buy these things. The goods from 12% to 5%, but daily use items like biscuits and all those things. There, the things was not readily, visible initially, because if there is a biscuit packet worth 10 rupees, and it had a, duty implication after SINVAT, if you used to take ITC credit, reduction would be hardly 10, 15 paise. But now, what it has resulted in is, because you see, there is something called Laffer curve or in economics. In case you reduce duties, the tax compliance will increase. In normal these products, there were a lot of traders and manufacturers which we know were outside the formal chain. When the duty rates are 12% and profit margins in these businesses are hardly 5 to 7%, the duty rates were higher than the profit margins, and their propensity to evade was high.
Yes.
Now, when the duty has come down to 5%, we'll see a compliant behavior, which is slowly coming. A lot of registrations have increased. If you see the figures, the registrations in month of December have increased drastically. And I'm sure this will gradually result as people will realize that getting yourself registered, showing your true, returns will not really make your life difficult. I'm sure things will slowly.
Okay, before I bring in Dr. Ajay Dua as well, Mr. Goyal, I have to understand from you. We were just talking about the custom duty cuts. So with the launch, sir, of the Bharat Trade Net and the new custom duty cuts, do you believe that Indian exporters are now truly shielded from this rising tide of international protectionism as well as the US tariffs?
You see, when the entire world is becoming protective, we have to stand our own feet to face it. What government has been trying, as the previous speakers have said, is Atmanirbhar Bharat. We are also trying to encourage production of strategic goods as well as labor-intensive items. Labor-intensive items are textile, leather, marine sector. These are the items for which government is giving benefits. As far as strategic sectors are concerned, we are also like aircrafts and nuclear power to have a clean-based, clean energy. Those sectors are being encouraged. Electronics, industry, mobile, all those things are being encouraged, but will take time. Yes. What government is trying to do is that procedurally, because our importers, exporters, as well as on the GST side, manufacturers and wholesalers, we are facing a lot of procedural issues. Government is also trying to relax those procedures so that the life becomes easier for businesses.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Goyal, for joining us. Let me bring in Dr. Ajay Dua into the conversation as well. Dr. Dua, my first question to you, sir, what is your biggest takeaway from Budget 2026?
Thank you for having me in this discussion. I think I would like to highlight that the Indian government, through its budget, by maintaining stability on projects which it had taken up, the emphasis which it was giving, it has sent a message down the line to the rest of the world that we are not perturbed by the geopolitical or the protectionism measures which are coming up in the developed countries far more than, say, in Southeast Asia or India. That we continue to be on our path of long-term vision of developing where our core competence lies. In this context, I like to give you two examples. One, while increasing our capex by about 10% from the last year to 12.25 crores from the earlier 10.6 crores, we have not chosen new sectors, but we have gone by where we have been putting in our money highways, railways mainly. And we continue to do that. New rail corridors, new highways being talked about, new cities being talked about to be developed as centers of competence for various other issues. Second, we have highlighted in this budget that, look, we realize we are a economy with 55 to 56% GDP coming from services. We want to be, given our population, we want to be accounting for 10% of the global services by 2047. And towards that, a number of steps have been enunciated apart from the labor codes, which were earlier about 2 months ago, said that we will be making the rules for it and notifying them at the earliest, irrespective of what the state governments want to do. It's a concurrently subject. The state governments fall in line, or if they do something, it has to be more liberal than what the central provisions are. And in addition, the centers of excellence being talked about, there was emphasis on Ayurveda, labor-intensive activity, plus emphasis on MSMEs, labor-oriented purposes, and at the same time, we are talking about high technology also in which we can play the role. We are not talking of increased R&D expenditure in, say, AI world, but we are saying we have identified semiconductors which go into reaching the state of AI. So we have started a mission for semiconductors and made a provision of 40,000 crores for it. So these kind of labor and skill development, sectoral emphasis is what I would say should be sending a message that, yes, we are upset with what happened to us from the United States levy of 50% duty, but we can handle ourselves. We've shown that. We have signed 3 or 4 major FTAs soon after President Trump's trying to get us off the rails. And our exports are more or less where we were, and for the future, we are making further provisions by going into other FTAs. These are bilateral, no doubt, they are not multilateral, but we are saying, at the same time, we are reiterating in these FTAs that we will continue to go by the WTO provisions of free trade as long as possible, and we will also respect the most favored nation treatment, saying, and if in one FTA we have agreed to give a duty concession to one country with which that FTA is there, that will also become available to all others, irrespective of whether we have an FTA with them or not. So, and as was mentioned by Mr. Goyal, in order to make sure that the customs regulations, custom rates do not come in the way, because we've been accused of having very high duty structures. Might be right, might not be right. I don't want to go into that. But we are preparing ourselves by gradually reducing the customs duties. Not one item today, which the finance minister read out, it was all for saying downward revision. How to make imports, exports easier, as well as quantify them to a lower level so that the burden is less. All this, I think, is a step towards stability and continuing to have a long-term vision, but minimizing the risks of our money not being put to good use. So we are selecting the sectors where the risks are low and where the need is essential.
So speaking of long-term vision, Dr. Dua, I have to understand from you your take on the rare minerals corridor that has been announced today.
Absolutely important. We've seen how China has been able to live. China, over the years, cornering all over the world rare minerals, not just the 7 on which it is controlling in the magnet making. and 90% of the processed magnets come from China, and that's how they've been able to kind of leverage its strength vis-a-vis all the importers. We would not like to get into that oddity in the future. So we know that we could be having some of these rare minerals, whether out of those 23, which are usually called rare minerals, or the 7 which go into this magnet making, etc. So where the potential or exploration shows that there could be something, so we would go take the next step in those mining steps, which are the 3 states: Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, mineral rich, both have borders also with one another, Tamil Nadu and Kerala.
Yes.
Reportedly, there are different kind of rare earths and minerals available. So this is long-term vision saying, yes, it might take 10 years for us to commercially exploit these. That's usually the time span for getting it to a stage from exploration to the end. We may be, with the provisions being made, may be able to reduce it from 10 to 5, 10 to 7 years or so each mining, but we would not then remain dependent upon one country, and we would then, if we are able to prove that we have exploitable, commercially viable reserves, you would see many countries of the world would want to come and partner with us and put in the money, which is money with technology to mine, which is be required to make sure that the process hurries up, and all of them we will get plugged into their supply chains.
All right, Dr. Ajadu, also speaking about China for just a moment, the finance minister has introduced the 10,000 crore SME growth fund. Do you believe that somewhere what's being called a cluster-based approach will finally enable some of our smaller units to actually compete with China in high-tech manufacturing, something that we've been discussing for many years now?
Yes and no, both. Let me put it this way. It is competing with China in terms of economies of scale is not really possible by a small-scale industry. The small-scale industry can be making niche products which are required for particular applications and in limited numbers. They are small, that is why they cannot do the mass-scale productions. Second, that doesn't mean if the scale is going to be small, that they should be inefficient. China today uses maximum industrial robots in the world in its manufacturing process. They are called, dark rooms. There's not one person, but 24 hours these robots keep working. They are called dark rooms because then there is no need for the robots to see the windows are closed, the doors are closed, but the process continues. Now, to compete with these dark rooms, certain amount of technology inflow, which may be possible in small-scale industries when they specialize. Japan became a hub in the electronic industry post the Second World War, not through its trading houses, what they call zaibatsus, but by supporting small-scale industry, letting small-scale industry get into the, as far as possible it was for it, given its constraints, into the technology development field. And then the ancillarization was supported by the buyer. The buyer now, say, Maruti Suzuki in India itself, let me give you an example. A lot of its products are made by small industries and medium enterprises, but with technological help, and in certain cases also by, and all of them have buyback arrangement, and certain cases the Maruti Suzuki has taken an equity in them, these smaller enterprises. So that is why I said yes and no, that it was desirable to explore it, to see if there are potential candidates. Then this small industry growth fund of 10,000 crores can go a long way.
Okay, and Dr. Dua, before I let you go, sir, I also must ask you about some of the industrial parks and infrastructure. Now, with the record capex of 12.2 lakh crores, will some of the plug-and-play industrial parks that have been announced today actually help lower the logistical costs and improve our manufacturing competitiveness?
Surely those should, because the very idea of plug and play industrial parks is that as soon as you are ready to uh, get into a venture, you don't get into what is the common facilities of having to procure land, having to build a factory on top of it, get the utilities, the connections, and make it into an industrial kind of an establishment. You pay for it by way of lease, or some places even it could be sold to you. You save the time on it, and at the same time you use that time for your core competence, what you are good at. Construction somebody else can do. These are very common things. We've tried these in certain industries. These seem to have worked because there has been repeated demand saying that do not ask us to, particularly the foreigners, tell us that don't ask us to go and procure land, then start developing it, then run around to get all the permissions from the state governments, utilities. So this will reduce the interaction and the time which is required for getting regulatory approvals. You straight make a proposal. If it requires a licensing, if it requires any registration with any authority, you get into that rather than wait for 2 years for all the basic work to be done. So in 3 or 4 fields, we have seen that these industrial parks come in handy. Our solar parks are like a plug and play. The land is given to you.
Yes.
The common facilities are given to you. Tamil Nadu, if you see, etc. That is how the solar parks really developed there. We've also seen now it's being talked of as chemical parks. Today's budget talks of it. I would think that in the chemical parks, one of the biggest requirements is making sure that the pollution and the affluent disposal arrangements are there. If every industry is to make it itself, again, what I talked about, investment, expertise not being there and time taken, but these industrial parks, if all that you have to do is plug into the arrangements which they have made, internally you make sure that you are entirely, you are compliant with the pollution laws, air and noise, etc. Externally, the park takes care of disposing the effluent which comes, and you pay for these. So I am a supporter of these. We've had success in the electronic parks, whether it was Kandla Free Trade Zone, Santa Cruz Electronic Zone. So exactly the common utilities were given, plots were built upon and then leased out to the potential electronic assemblers of that time, because all these are models of 70s and the 80s, but certainly desirable, and the central government can play a major role in facilitating the states to do it, because most of these industrial parks will have to be set up in conjunction with the state governments, because they have the factors of production which are required for.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Dua, thank you so much, sir, for joining us on NewsX with that perspective. Joining me on the broadcast now is